Are you in a position where you're defined by your age, and that's limiting you to pursue a dream or goal you want to accomplish? The More Than Your Age podcast is about having conversations with women who fully live their lives without being dictated or defined by their age. This is a space to encourage women who feel blocked to pursue a dream or goal based on their life circumstances. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast. I am your host, Erica Pasbar. Let's start living life fully and become more than your age. I felt like I had a special connection with my guest on this week's episode. I don't know what it was exactly, but there was something about the spirit of Karen Jackson that made me really enjoy her. And after speaking with her before we interviewed for the podcast, I just knew she was special and would bring a fresh perspective on truly appreciating your age and using your age in a positive light to those who may not see it that way. You don't know much about her just yet based on this intro, but believe me, you will after listening to Karen Jackson's story. Enjoy the show. Joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast is the award-winning poet and educator from North Carolina, Karen Luke Jackson. Welcome to the show.
It is so great to be here, Erica. I've been looking forward to this.
I have been looking forward to this as well. I just appreciate you joining me today, Karen. As you know, my mother-in-law introduced me to you and just thought that you would be a great fit. And then when you and I spoke on the phone, I just could tell you were this incredibly lovely and kind person when we spoke on the phone. You have lived such a rich life of altruism and care for many people based on the career path that you chose. You have both a master's and a doctorate degree in education. Could you just share with us part of your path in education and why education was an important career field for you?
Well, I loved school. Even as a little child, I would play school when I wasn't at school. And I've always loved to learn. I've been curious about things. And so it was a natural fit for me to want to stay in school. And the only way I could stay in school was to have a career that involved working with community colleges and universities. So it started at a young age.
Now, when you had this love for education at a young age and you decided to pursue a career in education, where did education as a professional, where did that first land you?
Well, actually, my undergraduate degree was in history, but it landed me at the University of North Carolina in the manuscripts department at the university, and I got a master's degree in student counseling, and that I was going to work in the community college system, but my career path actually was a very crooked path. I ended up working for a Meals on Wheels program because I couldn't find a job around the area where I was living until I moved to Western North Carolina. And there I landed a job at Blue Ridge Community College, where I did fundraising and a lot of work with strategic planning. Ironically, all my teaching was outside the classroom. I only was in a classroom when I was at the University of Appalachian State University when I was teaching the master's program there. So I've been associated with universities and all my career, but mainly on the edges, supporting the organization, the colleges and universities.
Okay. Now, when you were within the system, what made you decide to get your doctorate?
Actually, I was working at the community college, and I knew that if I wanted to pursue a presidency of a community college or advance in that field, I needed a doctorate. And so I was encouraged by my president to go after that. As fate had it, I had a career change and left higher education as an administrator and moved into retreat work, but that's the story for another day. But I really went after the doctorate because I was on a track to be a community college president. Yeah.
Okay. Now, because you did higher education in just in the time span of your career, what pivotal changes did you see or have you seen, now that you've been out, that you are most proud to have been a part of?
That was an interesting question. And I went back to my undergraduate career at Valdosta State University, where I got my undergraduate degree in history. I actually was the student body president. And the year that I was student body president, we talked the president and the dean, academic dean, into disbanding all classes for a week. And instead, we had a week of seminars at the college where every professor had to teach the same amount of classes they taught that they could teach about any subject they were interested in. And the students had to attend the classes, the same number of classes, but they could attend any seminars they were interested in. And it was pretty revolutionary to be able to pull that off at a public university. And I think that's when I realized that learning wasn't so much in silos and bins, but it's when people were passionate about what they were teaching and sharing and learning about. So I've always been a little bit of a rebel, working within the system, but also trying to do some creative innovations within a set system. At the community college, one of the things I was the most interested in was we were able to start an American Sign Language program with the help of grants and donors. And it was the first one in the state of North Carolina. So we brought into the curriculum a program where people could learn to be interpreters for the sign for people who could not hear. And that was I wanted to see new programs that we could really expand, and being involved with raising the money and getting that program going. And we had an immersion day of silence on the campus where everyone had to not speak, and there was no noise on the campus. So it was to allow us to experience what a person who could not hear was experiencing on our campus. So those were two things that I really was interested in.
Yeah, I mean, both seem well. One, I'm just even thinking about the idea to bring American Sign Language to the university when it was the very first one in the entire state of North Carolina. Was there a specific reason why you chose American Sign Language, or was there any reason from someone you knew or someone you cared about, or how did that come about for you?
We had in our community a woman who was, before the movie Coda, who was a child of two deaf parents. And sign language was her original native tongue, but she also could hear and could speak. And so because we had her as a resource in our community, and because she advocated for this program, we were able to see it through. And it was the first one in a community college in the state of North Carolina. So that goes to seeing what's, especially with community colleges, what's in your community, who's in your community, and putting the pieces together to bring about some real change based on who you have that you can work with. And that's what makes it exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad that was done. And then also, I wanted to know, with the seminar idea, did that continue year after year, or was that just kind of a one-time deal?
Sadly, it did not continue year after year. I actually think it might have happened a second or a third year. But I recently had a conversation with one of the professors that was on campus at that time, and he was reminiscing, and he said, "Karen, I think that was one of the best things that ever happened at that school." So,
wow. Well, two great ideas, and just being able, like you said, you like to break the rules a little bit and going and pushing forward to see some type of change and just like making something happen. Now, you also served as an executive director for two nonprofits, correct? What were the steps that you took to obtain those specific positions?
most of the shifts in my career was like following breadcrumbs, to be honest. It was like I knew I needed a change, and it was what appeared on the scene. The first nonprofit I ran was a Meals on Wheels program in Chapel Hill, Carrboro. And I had finished my master's degree, and I'd been working at the Southern Historical Collection, and I knew I needed a change. There were no jobs in my field. This was advertised, and I thought, wow, this looks like a really good cause. I'd enjoy working with volunteers, putting programs together, and I applied and was fortunate enough to get that position. And that was my first experience with nonprofits, because at that time there weren't master's degree programs in how to run nonprofits. So it was a new field, really, to be working in the nonprofit world. And then the second one was actually my job at the community college. I was the foundation director, which was a nonprofit that raised money for the college. So even though I was in a college setting and I was an employee of the college, I was running the foundation, which was a nonprofit organization. And I also worked to collaborate with nonprofits in the community. One of the projects we did was we were able to pull together several nonprofits to acquire some property for a residential hospice. And because it was adjacent to the college, they coordinated the hospice at that time with the curriculum for our nursing program. So collaboration with nonprofits in the community was very strong part of my work as well.
I'm putting a pause just momentarily on the episode because I want to ask you to do a favor for me. Would you pause the episode and would you share this podcast with one friend who you think would love to hear some inspiring stories from incredible women? This would help me and help the show grow. I would love for more and more women to hear these incredible stories. So go ahead, pause the app, share this episode or share the podcast with a friend, and then come back to hear the rest of the story. How many years were you a part of like that specific position where you were working with the university and the nonprofit at the same time?
I was at Blue Ridge Community College for 12 years.
Okay. And then after that, is that when you kind of transitioned to the retreat?
Well, I went up and taught for a couple of years actually taught for 1 year and then as an adjunct for another year at Appalachian State University, and thought that, well, instead of being community college president, that my career might be in academia doing teaching and research, because I love research. And that they did not fill the position that I was in, that was a temporary position, because of some budgetary cuts in the university system. So I came back and I thought, what am I going to do next? I had sort of outgrown, I had done what I wanted to do at the community college, and I had been reading and following the work of Parker Palmer. And it was really interesting because I'd actually met the man. And then when I went up to Appalachian State, all the new faculty were given one of his books as a part of their orientation, which was The Courage to Teach. And so I just knew that there was something I needed to be about that involved Parker's work, because it was the intersection of community, education, and spirituality. And that's where my heart was at that time. So that's when I made the shift from being affiliated with a university or a community college to looking at his retreat work. I had originally thought I could bring it back into the community college system, but when I began to do that work, it fit better outside the educational system. But many of the educators came to the retreats. In the United States, there were some community colleges and universities that were bringing his work into the organization. And then in other places, people were offering retreats, and the faculty and staff were coming to the retreats as a part of professional development. So the work was being done in a couple of different ways in the United States. So,
okay. And then because you were familiar about the retreat, this work, did you initially go as a participant yourself, or was in this situation kind of more research based for you?
Could you rephrase that question?
Yeah. So when you were first introduced to Parker, correct? When you were first introduced to the retreat and the workshops and everything, were you just researching that information because you said that you thought you would maybe take it back to the university, or were you attending the workshops yourself?
It was neither. What happened was I actually had a women's circle meeting in my home, and I was involved in teaching Sunday school classes and everything like that. And Parker's writing started appearing, and I was reading articles. I had an Episcopal bishop hand me a Xerox copy of his first book, The Promise of Paradox, because it was out of print at that time. And he said, this is one of the most important books I've ever read as it involved my ministry. So I was reading about the writings of Parker Palmer. And then he ended up coming to Canoga Conference Center, which is here close to where I was living in Hendersonville, North Carolina, for an Institute for Servant Leadership. And I went to that retreat, and this was before any of his center even was up and running. And he was teaching and offering he had been offering workshops on spiritual discernment. And he was doing some pilot work with K-12 teachers, using some of his ideas in that setting that had been funded by the Fetzer Institute. And I asked him then, how could I get affiliated with his work that was just getting underway. And he said, well, I don't know, you work at a community college and I'm working with K-12 teachers now. He said, stay in touch. And so that's when I ended up at Appalachian State, and I was given his book there. And I finally emailed him and I said, everywhere I go, you show up, Parker. So I know I need to be involved with the work you're doing, which was connecting role and soul. It was integrating who we are with the work we do in the world. It was that intersection of community, education, and spirituality. And ironically, 2 years later, I found he was working with community colleges in Texas and a couple of other places in the nation. And so that's when I was able to go out and get training to become a facilitator through the community college system that he was working with. And actually spent 6 months at Richland College shadowing the president to see how Parker's work was influencing the culture of that community college. So it was like it was like the work was calling me to it, but I had to wait until it was ready where I could plug in, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also just based on what you have shared so far, where there's this education in this community around his teaching, which is what you were doing already, really, within the community college, and that was of importance to you. And so it's just kind of like marrying these two worlds together. And, so then time moves on and you do start leading workshops and retreats and with the Center for Courage and Renewal in North Carolina. And I'm going to explain a little bit for the listeners as well. The website for the center states that they nurture supportive communities of reflection and practice to help people come alive with a renewed sense of purpose, build trustworthy relationships, and cultivate the courage to rise to today's challenges, making a difference within themselves and their communities. And when all this came to be, you shared a little bit too, but how does their mission align with your specific values?
Well, first of all, the Center for Courage and Renewal is not, although it's located in North Carolina, it is an international nonprofit. I mean, we have facilitators now all over the world. And it started as a Center for Teacher Formation with a mission to serve teachers, and then expanded to teachers in community colleges. Then people from other professions said, we also need this kind of renewal work because so many of us are burning out in fields like social work, ministry, healthcare providers. So it gradually expanded nonprofit leaders. It expanded to people in all professions, which was really pretty amazing over the 20 years that I watched that grow. How it aligns with my own missions is I had been involved in organizations trying to change things in ways that would bring a little bit more to change the culture, the fundamental culture of organizations, rather than just the organizational charts, to allow the whole person to show up at work, to honor a little bit more of intuitive knowing, to really take into account how important emotional intelligence was as we made decisions. I did a lot of strategic planning and organizational change work and got very frustrated because the language would change, but deep down inside, we had the old patterns. They kept coming back up. And so I was really looking for a different way of approaching situations where we had in universities and with students that would allow fundamental change to occur so that we could address some of the major challenges we were facing. And at Richland College, when I went and saw what was going on there, I saw how Parker's work was actually helping create a different culture. And I asked the president, with all that they were doing there, because that campus had it did not have a majority. 80 different foreign languages were spoken on the campus when I was there. And about I think a fourth of the faculty and staff had gone through a process called Circles of Trust, where people gather to do deep inner exploration of the inner life and the outer life, and how that shows up in work settings. And the president said to me, for the first time in my career, we really listened to one another. We slowed down and we listened and we really respected everyone at the table's opinion. And so that when we finally came to a decision for the organization or for the college, we were able to execute because we had heard one another's concerns. And I was really impressed that it was possible to do this in an organization. So it aligned with my sense that if we care deeply for helping people live out their vocations in life and bring their full self to their work, that we actually create a more loving and kind and caring and effective organization in terms of carrying out our missions.
When you would lead these retreats or workshops, and you would have these people that would come in, would it be a lot? Would it be a lot of company organizations, or would people come individually to the workshops?
They were individual. No one could be required to attend it. Unlike other professional developments, Parker was really clear that you can't do this deep soul work if you're required to do it. It has to be people who are ready to make the changes in their own lives. And so even at Richland, it was part of their professional development, but it was optional. People chose to be a part of these circles of trust and to do some reflection, deep reflection, that would allow them to align their values with their work. In fact, when Parker started doing this work with K-12 teachers, he was very careful to tell the school systems that if someone goes through a year or a 2-year program with a circle of trust and they decide to leave the classroom, it's the best thing for both the students and the organization, because they will have discerned that they don't need to be in a classroom with children. For other teachers, it renewed their sense of being in the classroom. These might have been teachers that had burned out and were ready to leave the profession. But after this time of deep reflection and sharing, they were able to reclaim their vocation as a teacher who really cared deeply for the children. So it was a way of nourishing a person's spirit, and giving them the agency to make choices that would be healthier for them and for the people around them.
Hmm. Yeah, I bet it was, just even for you to work with the people, that it was just a special opportunity to see just this internal change and reflection that people were experiencing of what they could do for improvement, or, how their whole person could just be more successful, to be better as a person in whatever their profession was. What when we're kind of talking all about the retreat and the workshop, what were you had this relationship with Parker where he said, keep in touch with me. You went to Richland College to kind of to learn and to work with the staff there. What were the next steps to get you working more frequently at the retreat and with these workshops?
After Richland, I actually was mentored there by an incredible woman, Elaine Sullivan. I say that Parker's writing and talking with Parker lured me into the work, but Elaine taught me how to do it. But I knew I needed to return to North Carolina. I'm not cut out to live in a big urban area. And I was coming back, and I tried to introduce the work in community colleges, but what I found was that nonprofits leaders were more receptive to the work in North Carolina. And I had a dear colleague and friend, John Finner, who I had done a lot of collaborating with in terms of co-facilitating strategic planning processes for nonprofits. And he joined me in the work. And we got a grant from Z. Smith Reynolds to offer this program to nonprofit leaders, a 2-year program. They had been doing a sabbatical program for nonprofit leaders who were burning out. And what we proposed to them was that creating a community of nonprofit leaders who were doing this discernment work together about their role in their organizations had more sustaining power than an individual sabbatical. And they funded our work. The work also then got introduced in some ways to the Duke University Nonprofit Leadership Program. And we were able to introduce Parker's work and some of this discernment process into their leadership program. And then I got involved with a project funded by the Lilly Endowment, which was to ministers and faith leaders, and was able not only to be a part of those projects, but I did the research evaluation for the Lilly grant. And that was about 60 programs across the United States. And the people that were involved and the faith communities that were involved, it was just such a blessing to even be involved in this work. So like I said, I followed the breadcrumbs, and I invited in and got to work with some incredible facilitators across the country. And John was just the key person that I worked with here in North Carolina. And he ended up with the Center for Courage and Renewal as a staff member. So,
Okay. So how many years total did you do all this?
more than 20 years. Yeah. The last few years I was doing the retreat work, I was also helping my parents who were aging. And so it became a situation where they would have an emergency and I would have to get somebody to replace me to lead a retreat. So I sort of had to reduce the amount of retreat work I was doing to have time to help my parents. So it wasn't a matter that I just stopped anything. It was that priorities shifted in terms of how I had to spend my time.
That makes sense. Well, and then I know, as time moved forward, you start winning awards for writing poetry. When this, you said these little breadcrumbs are. Here's another, like a big breadcrumb that just seems very different from everything else. So when did your love for poetry begin?
Not different at all. As a part of all the retreat work that we did, starting with Parker, I just got reintroduced to poetry. I never studied poetry a lot in school, because my degree was in history, not in English or creative writing. But we often use poems in our retreats to invite people into a deeper reflection. And it wasn't like what was the poet trying to say? It was what in this poem resonated with you? What made your heart leap? Uh, what words or phrases have meaning for you today and what's going on in your work setting or in your life? And I just got immersed in just wonderful poetry in the retreat setting. And as a part of also the reflection, we would often invite people to journal, or just make lists or, just do some creative expressions. I just started writing for myself just because it was a way to express things that had touched me throughout my life. And I started writing poems in response to some of the things that I was reading from other poets. And it captured moments in my spiritual journey that I had never shared with anyone else before. It was a way of expressing things that were very meaningful and heartfelt for me. So I decided I needed to learn a little bit more about poetry, and I started taking classes in a program called the Great Smokies Writing Program through UNCA, which was a program designed for older adults and people who were no longer in college to be able to improve their writing skills. And just slowly studied with some really incredible teachers, including the former poet laureate of North Carolina, Kathy Smith Bowers, and Dr. Ken Shamley from Brevard College, and Eric Nelson. And I just started slowly, class by class, trying to improve my skills. And it was just a creative endeavor that really was very meaningful to me. And the awards just were accidental. I mean, it was like one of the things about writing poetry is you can write it and never share it. But I learned something from Parker that he talked about going public with things that are meaningful to you or decisions you've made. And he said, it's one thing to do the inner work, interior work inside, but it's another thing when you go public with it, because then you have a response. And with going public with poetry, you have a chance for the poem to touch other people. You have a chance for there to be a connection between you and your reader that I find is a blessing to both. So I had friends encourage me just to send a poem out here and there. And then the first book that I published, actually, I didn't ever plan to do a book, but my sister died, and she was a younger sister, and it was really hard for me. And I started writing poems. She was a professional clown, and I started writing poems about her clowning in one of the classes I was taking. And the professor, Ken Chamley, said, "Don't you realize you're grieving your sister by writing these poems?" And after that, it was like I would wake up in the middle of the night with another poem in my head. It was like I wanted to capture her legacy in poetry. And so that's how I ended up with the first book, was a tribute to my sister. And
Wow.
so that's how I really got started.
What a beautiful tribute and a memory that you can have in honor of her. That's very special.
And it wasn't only me, it was that the little community where we grew up in South Georgia, they loved her dearly. So people who'd probably never read a poem were so thrilled to have this book about my sister with her portrait on it, the clown portrait on it, and also that it reached an audience that normally wouldn't be reading poetry, I guess is what I'm saying. It reached people who had known her and enjoyed her clowning. And so again, following the breadcrumbs. In other words, it's like it wouldn't. There are things that I don't know if other people have this experience in life. Maybe you've had it, where something won't let you go until you honor it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or till you express it, or till you deal with it. It's just gonna nag you. It's, tap you on the shoulder.
Yeah. I like that. Well, and it's you said that the professor was telling you about with your writings, it can be poetry that can be internal or you can make it public because then that can be used for somebody else too, and not just yourself. And so, in regard to the specific book that you wrote with the poetry in honor of your sister, was that was the encouragement from your professor a reason to make it public as opposed to just kind of keeping it to yourself, or why did you decide that you did want to publish that?
I decided I wanted to publish that book because I wanted my sister's legacy to be recorded. In other words, I I just felt like as time passed, the people who had known her, they still share stories about her down in South Georgia. But I also she had three sons, and my children had known her, and it was really sort of it really recounted her life, not only her clowning, but my sister was also suffered from bipolar. She was bipolar, and it chronicled her struggle and how clowning helped her survive in the world. So it had multiple layers to it. And I really wanted it to record her legacy. And for that, I wanted it to be public. Yeah.
Um, I think that that's really neat that you did that to honor her. You also have written short stories as well, and in just the fact that you have written this poetry and these books and these short stories, you were older when you started doing this. Did your age ever come into factor as far as I'm too late for doing this, or did you ever think about that?
I did. In fact, the first class I was in, it was at the Great Smokies program. I was probably the oldest person there, but there are a lot of older people that take up a creative endeavor later in life. And like I said, I guess I started writing poetry writing creatively maybe about 15 years ago, and I did think it's too late. You'll never get anything finished and published and out there. I do think that because I took it up later, I approach it differently than if it were going to be my full-time career. I mean, I have friends who are in their 30s and 40s and they're just launching on their publishing career, and it's a totally different trajectory. For one thing, you don't have as much time to wait for someone to accept a manuscript. So it's a matter of, do I want it out there or not? And I think a lot of older people are self-publishing for that reason. It's like uh, now I had mine were published by three presses, but I don't enter a lot of contests and stuff like that because there's such a time lag from when you enter it to whether it'll ever get published or not. So you just approach getting it out there a little bit differently. I'll never be, you know, it's sort of like I'll never be the solo performer, but I can be in the orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
I can put poems out there. And for those people that they touch it and those people who want to read it's just being a part of the creative process. And that's where the joy is for me,
Mm-hmm.
is
Well, and just the fact too that yeah, maybe you did have that thought, but it still didn't stop you. You still pushed forward and continued to do it. And you had this love, and you have this creative talent to write, and you're still using it. And something that I remember when you and I spoke, you shared with me that you find this kind of ties in the age. You find that so many women want to look younger or be younger or aim to try to live a life at a younger age, but they're not. And you said it was important to recognize your age and be proud of it and embrace the aging process. Could you expand, if you remember, just a little bit more on why you feel passionate about this?
yes, about 10 years ago, friends of mine kept saying, well, 60 is the new 40. And in my head, that didn't compute. I thought, no, 60 is not the new 40. I am not doing what I was doing at 40 years of age, nor do I have the same trajectory in front of me. And so I started reading a lot about aging and the role of elders, which we don't have in our culture. Elders are, uh, it's a term that's actually used more as a time of deterioration and decline, Whereas in other cultures, it's a time of wisdom keeping and wisdom sharing with younger generations. And so I have really tried to intentionally embrace the fact that I will be 75 in September. My time is precious, and the best I can do right now is to encourage and mentor people in their 40s and 50s in any way that they will allow me to do that. I get more pleasure and more excitement out of seeing someone in their 40s or 50s achieve something really important in their careers, as I do getting a poem published, because I feel like that the role I can play now is two things. One is to realize how precious time is and to spend it on things that are very important. And the other thing is to be available for the younger people who are going to have to meet the challenges that our generation has left for your generation. And it's not a matter of trying to stay in the game. It's a matter of encouraging younger people in any way we can. Um, and so, yes, I'd like to be in good health. I'd like to be able to be as vibrant and creative as I can. But I also have different tasks at this age than I had when I was 40 years old. And I want to fully embrace it and not deny it. That's one reason I let my hair go white at 50. I had to make a choice even then. Did I want to keep looking younger in order to compete in the professional world, or did I want to acknowledge where I was in life's journey? And I think a lot of the retreat work and the working with people about the inner life connected to the outer roles we play has helped me be in this place of reflection right now about my own age.
When we spoke before about that, you said similar words to what you just said now. I loved it so much because you're right. Like so many people will view whatever age as you are getting older, it's people say to me, I just turned 40. People say to me, oh, well, 40 is a new 30. And I remember it because I spoke to you before I turned. And I remember saying, no, like I'm not. I look at myself when I was 30 and I look significantly younger and I'm not where I was. And that's okay. I'm right here. And just like you're saying, Karen, too, is that it's, embrace it. Do not deny where you are. Embrace where you are. Still do your moment. Your life is precious, and do the things that you want to do. You're doing the poetry. You're chasing after that. And I love that you're also mentoring women who are 20, 30 years younger, that's important for you. And it's important for women my age and women younger than me to see my age and to see your age as well and say, life's not over. And they love what they're doing, and that we can learn from you and your wisdom. Like you said, the other cultures, is aging is respectable, and in our culture, unfortunately, it's not looked that way.
And part of the reason it's not is, well, there are a lot of reasons, but the first thing we have to do, people my age have to say, I am in my 70s. Not try to be a 60-year-old or a 50-year-old anymore. They say act your age when you're younger. And so, and our generation is living longer than many generations has lived on the planet. So there are no new frontiers for us, but it's not a matter of trying to stay stuck in our 50s and 60s. We need to look at those new frontiers. And I think this can be a time of incredible creativity, because we have nothing to lose at this point.
Yeah.
Things that I might have been embarrassed by or might have heard in my professional career 20 years ago, I don't have those concerns anymore.
That's true.
In fact, if you want to protest, this is the time to protest.
Just say what you want to say. Karen, as I shared at the beginning of the podcast, you have lived and you still are living a very rich life. You've pursued the things that you have wanted. You've chased after a variety of impactful careers, and you are embracing the aging process. It's really difficult for a lot of women to find value, like we were just discussing, in the aging process. And so my last question for you is the question I ask everybody. So if you could encourage one woman, however old she is, who feels blocked or limited to pursue a dream or goal based on her age or life circumstance, what would you tell her?
I would tell her to follow her heart. We shut down those deep desires and those knowings that we have about what we should do and how we should. Well, I didn't even use the word what we're being called to do. Like I said, what's tapping us on the shoulder, what we need to be about. And following your heart is the most important thing in this lifetime, because the heart knows. The mind can tell you all kinds of different things and make up all kinds of excuses, but there's a knowing deep inside each one of us as to why we're here on the planet. And I would encourage you to listen to that still small voice inside. But I have one more funny story to share with you, if you don't mind my sharing it.
I don't mind.
For Christmas, my son and daughter-in-law, I call her, got me a black T-shirt with embossed with the words "badass poet" on it. And I actually wore it to an exercise class 2 days ago and ran into our local co-op. And I had more 30-year-olds stop me and say, "Neat T-shirt." I had more conversation with the younger people who usually, there's no exchange at all. So I'm now in the market for more T-shirts that will increase the conversation between 30-year-olds and 70-year-olds. So if anybody's got any ideas for slogans, I'm open to it.
I love it. Well, that's wonderful, Karen. Karen, before we sign off, would you mind just sharing your website and where people can find your writings and your work?
Oh, yes, I do have a website. It's KarenLukeJackson.com. And the 3 books are listed on the website, along with links if you want to purchase one of them. The first book is Grit, which is the book about my sister, Clancy the Clown. The second book is The View Ever Changing, and it's really poems about my home place and the tug that home place has on me for our entire lifetime. And the third book, which you'll especially like since you visited the garden hamlet and the goat pasture, is If You Choose to Come. And it's poems that were written about this area of Western North Carolina. And it was written actually a little bit before and after open heart surgery. So it's about how the nature here helped me heal from that health challenge. And I think that either any of those books are, they've been blessings for me writing them, and I've enjoyed sharing those journeys with other people. So those are on the website.
Well, thank you, Karen. I will put your website in the show notes. And I just appreciate you taking the time today to just share your story and your wisdom. And it's exciting to see that you are continuing in your writing journey and your poetry and your creativity, and you're not stopping. So, Karen, thank you so much for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast.
And Erica, thank you for highlighting women in all stages of their lives, and just the joy and encouragement your podcast brings is wonderful. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you for sharing that with me. If you were encouraged by today's episode, like and subscribe to this podcast and share this episode with a friend. You can find me on Instagram at More Than Your Age and visit the More Than Your Age Facebook page. Keep striving for your goals, live fully, and we'll catch you next time on the More Than Your Age podcast.